The Curses and the Covenants, A History Weaver Mystery, Book 2, by Connie Worden, read by the author. Chapter 8. It wasn't exactly the dream of my life, but the job at the high school was looking promising. After my first interview, I got a call back for another, and then, as the final step, a classroom observation where I'd be interacting with the students. I wasn't sure how many other potentials had applied, but I didn't imagine the position would be the top of most teachers' lists. Of course, this would be the one thing in my life to work out. The one thing I wasn't sure I wanted to work out. A teaching job at Beaver Row Secondary. Meanwhile, Kim had called me back to let me know that the competing offer on the Eversley Road property had been accepted, so it looked like that was that. I could wave goodbye to my dream house on my own dreamland. It had probably been a bad idea anyway. I needed to be more practical, I told myself. The practical job I didn't want seemed to have the green light, so I'd likely be making the move, not only back to Beaver Row, but now to my old room in my mother's house. Very practical. Depressing, but practical. I got the call that I'd landed the job and drove back to the city to give my notice on my apartment and pack and move, with my mood plummeting faster than my car over the downhill summits between Beaver Row and the coast. But in this instance, pessimism was wrong. 1 week after moving back into my old room at Ma's house with my furniture residing longingly in her back shed, I got another call from Kim Dorset. "Hey, Ange, guess what? That accepted offer on the Eversley Road place, it fell through. It was a conditional offer and they changed their minds before they signed the final papers. Are you still interested in the place?" "Yes," I said quickly, but I tried to slow myself down. Be smart, Ange. Be practical. "Why did the other buyers change their minds?" I asked. "I'm afraid I can't discuss the details of the other sale with you," Kim said shortly. "You might want to talk to another realtor to handle the sale for you if you'd like to go ahead. Because I'm representing the buyers, you really should have someone else representing you." That sounded ominous. Was there something wrong with the land I didn't know about? A nuclear waste site underground, maybe? "Okay, thanks. I take your point. Is there anyone you'd recommend?" Kim gave me the name of another agent and I hung up to give him a call. January 1st, 1898. The start of a new year. Almost a new century. What a splendid time to be alive. All is really an old frontiersman at heart, and could live in a one-room cabin the rest of his life, but I admit to loving progress. All also acknowledges that progress suits him in ways, as leaving behind Longsford tradition of a son following in the father's footsteps has its advantages. Otherwise, we wouldn't have immigrated to Canada and begun a new life for ourselves. Also, father may never have approved my marriage to Ole, being a staunch believer in traditions. The almost penniless daughter, youngest of 8 after all, of a poor curate, was not in very good stead to make a so-called advantageous marriage. But father would have been unlikely to think the son of a coal miner good enough for his daughter, however equal our formal educations have been, both attending the same village school. However, father has been gone for 8 years now, and mother was helpless to stand against the marriage, knowing how determined Ole and I were, and having no better offer to tempt me with. Not that I could have thought any offer better than Ole's. But mother may have, if there were any others. Still, barely able to keep enough food on the table for herself from what father left to her, and with my small seamstress income contributing but little, she was not reluctant to agree to Ole's suit for my hand. All this was not why I sat down with pen in hand to write in my diary, however. We've had a strange encounter with the native inhabitants this very morning, the first day of the new year. I don't know if they realised that it was the first day of our calendar year, and that was why they chose this moment, or if it was coincidence. It seems to have been a matter of some importance for our new friends. They brought along a wooden cradle that appears to be somewhat ancient, but from a very hard wood and carefully preserved. We were given to understand that this cradle has been long passed down among their people. Through Charlie Little Bird, acting as interpreter, they told us that they were bringing us a gift for our first child. It doesn't seem to be a permanent gift, and from what I've understood, it is some form of peace treaty, and their traditions are binding in solemn agreement. When our first child has outgrown the cradle, we can pass it along to another who needs it for their first child, one among their people, I presume. It seems, as an act of good faith and peacekeeping, they wanted us to agree to leave untouched certain sacred grounds to the west of us. We had already understood that there was some sort of territory as our western boundary that the people considered sacred, and so chose our boundaries accordingly. The reason we ended up with only 40 acres, although we haven't found the smaller amount to be any hardship. So, seeing we had already decided not to pursue owning a greater share of the land, we were happy to formalize the agreement with the acceptance of this cradle as a temporary loan for our firstborn. It is rather beautiful and unusual. It has some mysterious carvings on it, and I'm quite fascinated by it. Neither Ole nor I fully understood the reasons the forbidden grounds are considered sacred. They seem to have something to do with some sacred objects of which this certain territory is considered to be the rightful home. We don't know the exact boundaries. We do know that the river, or Lodge Creek really, is one of them. It's the creek that adjoins our land, so on the other side is the beginning of the sacred ground. There should be no hardship in the agreement. It was made clear to us that we are perfectly welcome to walk on or cross this sacred ground. It would only be the disturbing of the ground that would be a violation of the terms as explained to us. We do not anticipate any difficulty in such an agreement, feeling that the 40 acres will be more than enough for us, so Ole and I did not hesitate to accept the terms. The only moment of uneasiness I had in the exchange with our native friends was when Charlie Littlebird emphasized that there is apparently a curse of some kind attached to the breaking of this treaty. The curse is to fall on the inhabitant of the cradle. While neither Ole nor I are superstitious, nor, certainly, do we have any intention of not keeping our part of the bargain, why would we ever want to bother their sacred grounds? I have to admit to a little shiver running the length of my spine at the mention of a curse falling on our firstborn child. It lent an eerie note to what was otherwise a heartwarming interaction and touching ceremony. It seems we have been accepted among the people, if not quite as one of them, at least on the closest terms available to us. The summer was a blur of red tape and signatures and finalizing the financial arrangements with Ma and Uncle Jim, then winterizing and upgrading the motorhome in preparation for a fall move-in on my new property. My property. I felt so grown up for the first time in my life. I owned a property. No house, but at least I had a start. I'd decided on a minimum of changes to the motorhome. It was desperately in need of updating, but nothing a little paint and some different fabric choices couldn't fix. I needed it to be a home I could live in for years to come if it took that long to get a house built, so my priority in work done to the motorhome was livability. Uncle Jim had encouraged me to build my house in stages as I could afford it, and I'd decided on that course of action. No sense accruing any further debt. At least I'd have a regular income again come fall, and living in a motorhome on my own property, making very low repayments to my mom and Uncle Jim, would mean I could save money fast. But the house wouldn't be started this year, that much was sure. Between preparing for living in a motorhome and for teaching the English classes that would fall to my lot this school year, along with researching guidance counseling and what a guidance counselor actually did day to day, I had little time for a social life, which was just as well. I saw plenty of Ma and Uncle Jim and Auntie Donna, and through them more than plenty of Sarah, who had many unwelcome opinions on the subject of my new accommodations and on my future accommodations once I could afford to build. She seemed to think I had no ideas of my own and was desperately in need of hers. Occasionally, through Sarah, I'd see Larry Massey. I started to wonder if there was more than friendship between them, but Sarah assured me she wasn't interested in him, and he was fair game. A suggestion which annoyed me more than it should have. But honestly, planning my future house was one thing. Planning my future life was another. and Kim and I had made half-hearted plans to get together for coffee sometime, a time which kept getting postponed and never did materialize all summer. On a whim, one day after lunching in Peggy's with Sarah and Larry, I asked Judith Meredith if she wanted to go for coffee sometime. But her response fell short even of the polite evasion that Kim and I used with each other. She worked as many shifts as she could, and when she wasn't working, she needed the time to catch up at home or unwind, she told me. Ouch! Not even the nicety of, "That would be great, I'd really like to, but..." Did she have something against me personally? I couldn't imagine what it could be, so likely she just wasn't the social type or in the market for new friends. However, part of me admired her honesty and wondered how to imitate it. Maybe not to the point of rudeness, but at least to a degree. Wouldn't it be wonderful not to do things I didn't want to do but did just because I felt pressured to do them? For instance, Sunday after Sunday since moving back to Beaver Row, I'd been attending Beaver Row Baptist faithfully with Ma, and no part of me wanted to do that. The church was populated almost entirely by seniors who gushed over the presence of someone under 40 in their midst. They were sweet, but my heart wasn't in the church attendance the way they assumed, and the pretense of it was galling. But the summer flashed by with all I had to do to be ready for the day after Labor Day and the start of the school year. I was still living at Ma's and not quite ready to move into the motorhome. It needed a few added touches, mostly painting. I could give it on the weekends, but it was close. And as far as my new job, I felt as prepared as I thought I reasonably could be without knowing what I was getting into. Staff meetings in advance of the school year and meeting my coworkers made me feel a little more relaxed about jumping in with both feet when pushed off the ledge. But they didn't relax me enough to keep me from waking 2 solid hours before my alarm on my first day of classes. The butterflies in my stomach were pure dread and not at all excitement. You just have to get through the first little while and then it'll all be normal. You'll get used to it, I pep-talked myself in the mirror as I combed the tangles out of my wet hair after my shower. This will get better, I promised myself. But I wasn't sure I believed my own promises. Suddenly, all I could think about was having a smoke. Perfect! At least the cravings might dull the anxiety. I could focus on my Nick fit instead of the butterflies. I wasn't going to give in, though. I'd made it so far this time. I'd just have to get through my first day of school without a cigarette. The day would start off with a grade 10 English class. 15-year-olds, probably the age that terrified me most. Nothing like getting thrown in at the deep end. Show no fear, I said out loud to myself as I drove up to my designated parking space. They're like wolves, looking for any sign of weakness, so don't show them any. I was pretty sure it was futile advice, however. This was different than subbing for the day or a short period of time. If I had a bad experience subbing, I knew I didn't have to play it on repeat, every day, for an entire school year. It was the permanency of my new situation that was getting to me. Still, I mustered the calmest face I could master as the students trickled in before the bell. In spite of the nerves, I found my focus captured by some of the students, which helped take my mind off myself. The name Coral Lyons caught my attention on the student roster. Wonder if we're related. I made a mental note to ask Ma after class if she knew another Lyons family in town. June and July Eagles, twins who couldn't have looked or acted less identical. June was short and dark and vibrant, while July was tall and red-headed and reserved. I vaguely knew the Eagles family as being the Beaver Row Books people. The bookshop was on Eversley Road, so we would be neighbors. I hadn't remembered that the bookshop people had twins, though. The twins and Coral, with another girl in the class, seemed to be a tight little friend group. Fern Mann was the 4th member. Unlike the other 3, Fern seemed painfully ill at ease in her own skin. I felt her pain, recognizing a kindred spirit. I didn't know that these 4 girls would come to be a significant part of my life throughout the next few months, but I liked them instantly. I didn't sense any trouble from their direction. My first impressions told me here was a nice group of girls. I could feel myself relaxing somewhat. We'd gotten through roll call and my introduction when the classroom door opened slowly and another student sauntered in, apparently entirely unconcerned about the tardy mark she'd get on the attendance record. The teenage girl with her hair dyed black examined me coolly through wary brown eyes under too much makeup. I couldn't help noticing her model-like cheekbones and wondering why she didn't make more of them, but hid her looks behind an unflattering hairstyle and color and makeup. "You're late," I informed her, stating the obvious. "First day and first tardy for the year, don't make a habit of it, please," I said. I knew I'd better crack down on the first day and set the tone of authority for the rest of the year, or the class would be running wild by day 2. The late girl wasn't the only one feeling wary. It wasn't a good idea to judge students on first sight, but on the other hand, one could hardly avoid it either. The impression she gave me was that she was there to cause trouble. "Are you Julia Fairchild?" I asked, checking the attendance list. I tried to take the tension out of my voice, but didn't entirely succeed, I could tell. "Yes," she said, and her voice was not what I expected. It was soft and low. There was no belligerence. She sounded just tired. "Okay, Julia, welcome. I'm Ms. Lyons. I'll be teaching your English class this year." She only nodded. I started to think maybe I had misjudged her. I launched into my lesson, feeling a little more comfortable. No one seemed excited to be here, but on the other hand, no one seemed inclined to lead a mutiny just yet either. Julia didn't say a word for the rest of class unless called on. She answered any questions I asked her in as few words as possible, but she answered them in her quiet, flat voice. I couldn't help wondering what Julia Fairchild's story was. I didn't have long to wonder, however.